Welcome to Manga's Seal YouTube channel. The previous video link is on the description box or on the top right card. Volume 16, The Half-Elf Godkin. The undead burned the scroll, activating the spell stored. Wow. A dense fog spread out with the undead at its center, covering Decim's entire field of vision, reducing his visibility to only a few meters. The fog was so milky, thick that he could only look ahead by maybe 5 meters at most. More irritating magic from his opponent. He was about to cast an attack spell, but it wouldn't be effective unless he had a clear line of sight. It was the same for white area magic. That undead used a scroll while walking, so he should be moving right now. It was possible that the target was not in range, even if he attacked the spot he last saw him. Decim commanded Behemoth to search for the undead, but realized that his movement was dull. Behemoth's senses relied on its eyes, so it couldn't find the enemy because of the fog. If that's how it is going to be, Decim thought. He cast a 4th tier spell, Tremor Sense. This spell allowed him to sense even the smallest amount of tremors, allowing him to find his opponent's position. It was more effective on land, but a floor should work as well. But what? He is nowhere around, you say. Tremor Sense told him that the 2 grandchildren were still here, even though he couldn't see them through the fog. The tremors were probably caused by them changing their postures. It was hard to think that the undead would escape by teleportation, thus leaving them behind. It was even harder to believe that the summon was cancelled. Then, what happened? Decim soon stumbled upon the reason. He is not touching the floor. He is floating in the air. He didn't realize it because the enemy previously only used his legs to run when he tried to escape, but he had to be floating through some means. Tremor Sense could sense even the most trivial of vibrations from the floor, but its range did not extend to air. The undead was doing a splendid job at getting on his nerves. Such attempts at stalling for time are meaningless. You irritating muck. This was starting to get really unpleasant. Maybe he should just call the humans over and wipe them out together. It would probably be quicker than this. This weakling. He would have been dead already if we had been fighting outside. He couldn't immediately think of a way to drag the children and the undead outside. He could blast the wall and push them outside, but he doubted that it would go as expected. Decim hurled an order at the Behemoth who was stumbling aimlessly and made him stand by his side. He was not sure about the guy's movements inside the fog, but it was possible that the undead was targeting him. That wasn't something he had to worry about as he wouldn't die in a single hit, but he didn't really want his blood spilled again by such a lowly being. Time slowly passed by as he tried to sense the enemy's movements. It hadn't been that long since, but the sensation of his mana gradually going down made him feel like time flowed slower than usual. I can't waste any more time. He would just blow the fog away. Decim tried to remember the spells he hadn't used for a long time. As Behemoth had mowed down all of his enemies up till this point, there were a lot of spells he hadn't used after learning them. He knew at least one spell that could blow this fog away. He chose a 9th tier spell, Tempest. A storm started rampaging, clearing the fog in an instant. However, the fierce rain that came along with it obscured their vision again. The swirling winds were ferocious, strong enough that even Decim had to spend his full effort just to stay put. It was extremely difficult to move amidst this. As expected, only Behemoth with its huge body could withstand the raging winds enough to move around, even though his speed would go down. That guy shouldn't be able to move in the middle of this storm either. Nothing was visible inside this downpour, even Behemoth couldn't find that undead amidst this. But it was different for Decim. Tremor Sense would pick up the vibrations caused by all of the raindrops falling on the floor, so he couldn't discern between them and the steps made by some entity, even if they walked around him. On the contrary, he could sense the spots where the tremors from raindrops were weaker. Inside the image of the flat topography this room made inside his head, he found 2 such spots where the rain was being obstructed. One was the place where his grandchildren stood, the other one was naturally the undead's location. He is moving. This fierce rain was one in which he couldn't even see before him. Even Behemoth, with all the strength his huge body provided, could barely move around in the ferocious winds. Then, how was that undead moving inside this storm? He should have been caught by the winds even if he tried to fly. Decim was only puzzled for a moment. He immediately dispelled Tempest. The rain and the winds born of magic disappeared like they weren't there in the first place, but the wet floor and his soaked clothes proved that it hadn't been an illusion. Decim swept away the wet hair that was stuck to his face, and saw a wall standing between him and the undead's location. The undead probably made it when the spell was dispelled. Cut it out, you bastard. Decim shouted angrily. What was that about, fighting fairly? Sneaking behind one wall after another. Such cowardice. Isn't it normal to use tactics in a battle? Please don't ask me such obvious things. I have some questions as well that I would like for you to answer. The undead spoke from behind the wall. He should have ignored it, considering his mana was vanishing by the second, but it sparked his curiosity. That undead's words should contain the ideations of those twins and by relation, their parents behind them. He should listen. What are they? Is it fine to leave the humans alone? It had been some time since we started fighting here. Maybe the elves below are being massacred right now, you know. He was stunned at the somewhat unexpected question, but decided to give an honest answer. He momentarily thought about cancelling Behemoth's combat form, but then, it would take some time if he wanted to return Behemoth to his present form again. We were talking about that despicable undead here. Even if they were in the middle of a conversation, he would surely come attacking if he saw a chance. A single hit would be far from fatal, but he wanted to avoid taking one head-on. So Decim decided to continue maintaining Behemoth in combat form, even though it would continue to consume his mana. From a certain point of view, it's probably better to save them, considering that they could awaken their blood in the later generations like those two, but there are elves elsewhere too. Plus, I have more expectations for those who could escape by themselves. In a gist, there is no need to save those who are weak enough to get killed by something like humans. On to the next question then. I heard there is a hidden treasure of the elves. A hidden treasure of the elves. Are they talking about me? Or is it about this thing here? By this thing you mean Primal Earth Elemental. Primal Earth Elemental. Of all things, that's what caught your attention. A Primal Earth Elemental is what you've summoned, right? Or is it a different race, an elemental with a different name? Do you call it by a different name? Even though it was fine if the lowly worm died in ignorance, Decim was irritated that he thought Behemoth was just a simple Earth Elemental or something from a similar race. Considering he also had to educate his grandkids correctly, he had to correct the enemy's misunderstanding here. That's Behemoth. The elemental guardian of the land, Behemoth. Behemoth. So I didn't mishear it, elemental guardian of the land. Not the great magic beast of the continent. The raid boss. The Behemoth I knew looked a lot different. Who was the one that named it first? You? Someone else, but then, who? The questioning tone felt a bit forceful. Why was he interested in that of all things? What's this great magic beast of the continent? He felt like he heard the term raid boss, a strong enemy that required a party to defeat though. This guy, or his grandchildren to be more accurate, maybe they knew some things not even he knew about. It would be better to not answer the undead's questions anymore. How about taking down that wall if you want me to answer? Isn't it rude to talk without even being able to see each other's faces? Then it's fine if you don't answer. I only asked that question out of intellectual curiosity. Was it the undead who wanted the information, or was it the grandchildren who somehow got their hands on some information and wanted to know more? The two kids who were drenched from the rain had blank expressions, so Decim couldn't read anything from them. And another question. That's enough. There's no longer any reason for me to continue talking with you. Feeling anxious, Decim put strength in the stare he was directing at the twins. The questions were completely different from what he was expecting them to be about, and he couldn't expend any more mana. There's no need to talk anymore. That's the end of our conversation. Suddenly, the wall disappeared. He was stunned at the unexpected development, just as he was about to use green chain on the twins. He hesitated for a moment about who he should target. This should probably be your limit. Anyhow, your mana should be reduced, by a lot at least. What? Decim was confused by the undead's extremely cold voice. Why could he sense complete calm from him? An incompetent undead who could do nothing but stall for time. He should just command Behemoth to crush him into a pulp. Decim turned his gaze towards the stairs behind the undead. He thought that maybe this attitude was because he had achieved his goal to stall for the arrival of the humans, but he couldn't see anyone coming up the stairs. Even if he concentrated on listening, he couldn't hear any human footsteps, or any other footsteps for that matter. He didn't know what the undead thought of his actions just now, but the undead started speaking again. I said your mana should mostly be gone by now. How much longer can you maintain Behemoth? Probably a few more minutes at least, I think. Ah, so that's what this is about. You thought that you could win against me without my mana. Sure, I wasn't able to avoid your punch at the start, but that's because you were summoned suddenly. I could have easily avoided it if I knew you were going to appear. I know. The voice was as cold as it was before. Decim took a gulp unconsciously. Why does he behave like that? Strange. Why was he getting pressured by such a weak undead? His blood came from the one who dominated the world in the past. He stood at the pinnacle of the elves as the current strongest elf. Decim gritted his teeth and suppressed the shameful emotions welling up inside his heart. I see it now. He shouted with a thunderous voice. You made me bleed with your fists, so you're thinking that you can win in a physical melee. That punch barely did any damage to me, you see. I know that too. Upon receiving the undead's calm response to his anger-fueled shout, Decim felt an unpleasantness that couldn't be put in words. Maybe he was Just for a moment, an impossible thought flitted across his mind. Then why? Why did he fight like that? This was a bluff. The enemy was trying to deceive him by acting calm. There's no way it could be anything else. Behemoth. He wasn't sure if that was an angry shout or a scared shriek. Crush him. Let's start then. Fearsome understood the reason behind the undead's calmness the very next moment. Triplet maximize magic, cacophonous burst. Release. There was an explosion of sound waves at first, then a pair of angel wings appeared next. A storm of shock waves hit Behemoth, who stood between Fearsome and the undead, as a rain of light rivaling the downpour from before pierced its body. The elemental guardian of the land's health was being blown away by the second. It didn't bleed or lose parts of its body like a living being, but Fearsome, as its master, knew Behemoth was standing on its last legs. Confusion. Nothing but confusion. Behemoth was the greatest elemental. No one was on par with it. Even though it received damage in fights until now, there were no more than a few scratches considering its enormous health. And that. Like this. Not once was its health reduced to the verge of death like this. No way. Well now. I didn't expect that even 6 hits weren't enough to take it down, even though I triggered its weakness. Would it have been different if I was more specialized in offensive magic? Just like before, Fearsome couldn't feel a single emotion from the undead's calm voice. It was like he was a completely different person from the undead before. Well, what the hell is even happening? The confusion welling up in his heart calmed down for a bit, and in its place, fear ran through his body. The fleeting thought from before loomed larger now. That perhaps, this undead was stronger than him. No. Behemoth. Protect me. Behemoth, upon sensing his thoughts, moved to cover Fearsome from the undead's sight, and brought down its right fist on the enemy. I did it. What? Behemoth followed with a punch from his left hand, meaning that undead wasn't killed in a single hit. Even though he had received 2 hits face on, he saw that the undead still brazenly stood on the other side. He wasn't crushed. Although it had crushed every enemy until now, that undead stood there like it was nothing. Triplet maximize magic, cacophonous burst. In front of Fearsome's eyes, Behemoth, the invincible great elemental, turned into a large pile of dirt.